student. They'll go online. Thank you. They'll go online and choose either the high school or the middle school WARNS. We have a user and data management platform that are associated with both of these assessments. It's called PISO, which stands for the Portal for Supporting Successful Outcomes. As it says here, it measures both assessments measure 6 risk and needs domains. And I'm going to emphasize our information website again, warns.wsu.edu. One of the other things that this is kind of an aside to the grant, but what I wanted to make everyone aware of, because we've just implemented the Spanish translation of the WARNS for the high school version. The middle school has already been translated, and it's been available for the last year or so. But now both of our assessments, middle school and high school, have a Spanish language option. And this is an example of a WARNS screen that the student sees when they're completing the assessment. They see lists of WARNS items, and up in the corner here, you can see there's an option for the student to click on if they want to do the assessment in Spanish. And likewise, if they select Spanish, they get over to the Spanish version of the same set of questions, they can go back to English. We've set it up this way in order to try to maintain as much agency as possible for the student, and alleviate any kind of awkwardness between the counselor and the student as far as the choice of which language they might want to select. So that's now available for both assessments, and we're really happy about this offering. Finally, the WARNS report that is generated at the end of every assessment, and this is just kind of a small snapshot of the top of the report, and it provides a total score, a total risk score, as well as a fairly straightforward 3-level score for each of those 6 domains: low, moderate, and high risk. What's not shown here is we also provide a list of all the WARNS items and the responses that the student selected, and that list of items is provided in both English and Spanish if Spanish is selected as an option. So this report is what Mary and Chad are going to be looking at to try to make changes and improvements to. So now I'm going to turn things over to Brian to continue with details on the grant.
Sure. Thanks, Bruce, for that great introduction. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Brian French. I'm a professor in educational psychology at Washington State University. What I'll do is talk a little bit about the grant we've just received that started this July, and then I'll cover just part of the work we're doing and have some questions for you. And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues to move on to the next component of what's in the grant. This award reflects, work that really began quite some time ago. The grant work itself, trying to procure these funds to help improve WARNS, has been going on for about 3 years. So our team was very excited when we were awarded this year with a multidisciplinary team. What this project will allow us to do over the next 4 years that you'll see on the screen is really focus on some certain aspects of WARNS to hopefully help improve the measure and how it functions with our users. One will look at defining a few more domains, which I'll talk about in a bit, and refining this both for our middle school and high school versions. We're hoping to expand some of the content coverage that it will assess. We're looking at some accessibility features and improving that one of my colleagues who will talk about today, focusing on how we communicate those results in classroom or with students and with parents and with counselors. Looking to really start to how the instrument can be used to build rapport and action planning with students, really making that information useful. And the last thing that IES is really focused on, or Institute of Education Sciences, is when they're funding projects for things that are being used in schools and in systems, is really to figure out cost analyses. So one of the things we'll be actually gathering data on during the lifetime of the grant is how do we build these systems, both the platform Bruce mentioned, as well as WARNS. And on that platform, we envision adding things over time, other measures. How do we build this in such a way going forward that it really is cost efficient and sustainable over the time? And for us, that means how do we get this to a spot where we can continue to develop things over the future of WARNS and the assessment system we have, with offering at the very minimum cost to our users. And that's super important to us. What this does, the funding does allow us to do for the next 4 years, is actually cut the cost by 60% for our users, given the funding that we have. And we're super excited about that. And I think that that type of model will help us figure out through those analyses, what do we have to come back to in year 5, 6, and 7, both with any other funds we have, but figuring out kind of that baseline cost there. So that's the life of that project for 4 years and what we're focused on. Bruce, since you're controlling the slides, I'm going to say next slide, please. Thanks, Bruce. So to start with, we have about 30 users or 30 people in the room besides us. If you don't mind just taking a few moments in the chat just to tell us who's in the room. Maybe if you have a connection to WARNS, what district you're working in or institution you're working in, that would be great to see that populated in the chat so we have an idea of who's here. And while you're doing that, my colleagues will monitor that. I'll tell you my involvement and my connection to WARNS. I got involved in 2014 when our colleague, one of our colleagues who also works on this project, Dr. Paul Strand at Tri-Cities WSU, asked me to get involved in WARNS, helping with some of the technical work. So my area is in educational and psychological measurement. And he said, I think we need someone like you to help us look at WARNS and look at this with our team in Tacoma and with, at UW Tacoma and us. So I got involved in WARNS that way, and I was really impressed with the way it was functioning from a technical standpoint. And then I got interested in the content and how it was used in the schools. And so my work has just continued on the research side of things since that point in time. So it looks like we are getting things populated in the chat as I told my story. So that's great. Thank you. And it looks like we do have some users here. So that's awesome. Thank you. So what I would like to ask to start some dialogue instead of us talking the whole time, since we do have a few users here, if someone's willing just to take maybe 30 seconds or a minute to talk a little bit about how you're using WARNS and what's working or some success you've had and maybe some frustrations you had. See if anyone's willing to speak out on that.
So I work in the Colville High School. My name is Christy Adams.
Hi, Christy.
Hi, and we use WARNS just because we live in such a rural area. Sometimes we don't really know what's going on with those students. So we use that WARNS test to really help the kids, you know, how are you getting to school? Like, what is your home life like? So we take that and we go over it with our counselors. And then if nothing really helps, we take it to our truancy board and they look at it and they see what we can do for that student.
That's great, Christy. Thanks for sharing.
Is there anyone else who would like to share? Because
Sure. I would say good morning, but I think it's afternoon.
great. Thanks.
That's right.
Feels like morning over here. Port Townsend, Jefferson County. I'm the truancy coordinator here. And good to see your face, Bruce. I think I've talked to you on the phone or anyway. Let's see. You know, I haven't been in the schools as much recently, but when I was using it, I will tell you how I used it. And I'm just gonna, because I might have done something strange or maybe it's good, I don't know. So the schools don't do it, I do. So juvenile services, I go out there, I have my computer, I bring it, the kid fills it out, and they print it out and we talk about questions. I usually get permission to back up a little bit. I usually get permission from the family to meet with the youth because I've got a lot of blowback. So I've learned that it's good to talk to parents. Most parents like that, myself included. And then I use the results of that and some other things I may have learned from the family or from the parents, and put together a summary for if the kid does go to CEB. I write up a little summary with each domain and then some other things thrown in that I learned. And that is disseminated to the CEB members, which may have been what the person before me said. I'm sorry if I'm repeating, but that's how I use it, and I find it helpful.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, Erin, go ahead. I see Erin has her hand up.
Yes, so I'm with Everett Public Schools. I'm the truancy coordinator there, and we use the WARNS at our 3-day unexcused absence conferences. So any student that meets that threshold, we have them take the WARNS, and then we have the school attendance teams and the counselors take a look at the results, and then we plan, individualized interventions for those students that have scored high in certain domains. So we're trying to use it as a real preventive measure. So hopefully they don't hit, 15 days unexcused and we're filing a petition or having to refer the youth to our community engagement boards. So we're trying to do early intervention work with the WARNS. And I really like how quickly it populates the scores and gives you that information instantaneously. So I enjoy using the WARNS a lot. Thank you for, continuing to work with districts and providing this platform for us to use.
Thanks, Erin. If I could just ask one more thing. I really appreciate you speaking up here from Everett, because you folks kind of have developed your own method for giving the WARNS to small groups of students. So I'm wondering if you could just say a few words about that.
Sure. So our large conferences our conferences at the secondary level, we do it in a group format, and we do them on a monthly basis, and we have lots of staff present. We have the school counseling teams there, our family support advocates there, our intervention specialists there on site. And we have the students. We added your link to each of our schools' web pages, their homepage for each individual school, so that the students can log in and access the assessment, and then they take it as part of that conference. And like I said, we have lots of staff in the room. We're walking around. If a student has questions about some of the content, we can answer it. We make sure that they're only focused on their own computer and respecting their peers' privacy. And then after, they can be excused from the conference after they take the WARNS assessment. And then our school teams look at that data and that information at a separate meeting without the youth present, to identify the kids that we really need to be starting some early intervention on around attendance. So that's how we use it. We've just put your link, the WARNS link, on each of our school websites, and we have an email and a login for the youth to access the information. And then on our staff district homepage, you have to log in as a staff member to have access, but you can pull up the assessment results. And we have youth the students use their student IDs, since it's unique to each student. So we can identify who that student is just by their student ID number. So we can pull up the results that way.
That's great, Erin. I really think that's a great protocol that you all have come up with, and worth sharing with people, with other districts. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Christy, Erin, and Kurt. For me, what it really highlights is the different models of use for WARNS and how it can be helpful in different situations, from bigger districts to smaller districts to different types of users. And I think what I also heard, which I really like as a measurement person, is you guys are using this in combination with other information. Like Kurt mentioned, it's part of other information he's adding to reports to understand that environment. Or Christy, you called on how else do we understand what's going on in the family environment, and what other information can we bring to know what's going on. And I think, to me, that's just great that it's not just WARNS, but it's WARNS in combination with this other information to understand the situation that helps you move forward. And to me, that's just great practice. So I like hearing that, and it's really cool to see those different models out there. So Bruce, I'll ask you to go on to the next slide, if that's okay. And I do see we're getting some questions in the chat, so I think they might be directed at some of the users, but we can try to touch on those as we go through too. So two things I'll talk about is expanding our domain coverage, which we're looking at, and focusing on some strength-based item content that we're looking at towards our revision process. And I'll talk about that as I talk about how we're going about our revision process, so you understand that. So Bruce, go ahead to the next slide, please. So updating item content, as Bruce mentioned, WARNS was developed quite some time ago. And if you're familiar with testing and the rotation of educational and psychological testing, tests usually are reviewed about every 10 years or so in terms of normative information and content updates. And so when we started looking at the WARNS, and this was part of this impetus for going after the funding for this, you can see that some of our items in terms of content might not reflect really where the students are today in terms of use of technology, social media, new terms, just even terminology instead of vaping, what didn't exist really 10 years ago in terms of language of kids. So we're really trying to look at the item content that exists now and think about how do we need to update the language that's there and what's missing from what kids are dealing with within those still 6 domains, and what needs to be revised there. So we're going through an iterative process of doing that, coming up with new content, making sure it reflects what we're trying to measure and that it reflects the situations and the environments kids are dealing with today. So we're hoping by doing that, that improves what we might say is space validity. So when the kids look at this, they say, yeah, I understand that, that's what I'm dealing with. And then that information then is a bit more accurate. That's going back to the student and the people like yourselves who are working with those students. So that's part of what we're doing in terms of what exists now. Bruce, next slide, please. And how we're doing that, we're looking at both the high school and middle school instruments. If you've seen both of those instruments, there's some similarities and some slight differences in terms of the language that's used and some of the contents that's there. So we're going through in the first 2 years, really focusing on revising those instruments that exist, doing the content revisions, trying them out. So what that means for users, for instance, is the kids you work with might see a few extra items now and then. They won't go into scoring. They'll just be collecting data for us to look at and see how those items are functioning, to see if that content makes sense to include with improving the instrument. So that will happen. And then what we're doing in the last part of the grant, the last 2 years, is really collecting a variety of evidence to really support how the scores are used. And that's going to be from different things, from looking at this theoretical model do we have with the data we collect, does that really fit? Looking at things like item bias, or what we call differential item functioning, to make sure items are functioning the same across groups, seeing how WARNS scores correlate with other measures that do exist, as well as important outcomes that we've identified in the schools. And so that'll help us get a sense and then make a case that we think WARNS scores can continue to be used in the ways you're using after this revision process. And that's important for us to document just from a technical point of view. Bruce, next slide, please. Thanks. The other thing we've gotten feedback over the last few years is really thinking about deficits and strengths. And so WARNS, you saw those 6 domains. You'll see them again in a few moments. We're trying to think about, with the 6 domains that are there, what other domains do we want to add that take a different framework, maybe an asset-based or a strength-based lens, to give more information to the users and capture something else about the child and their environment they're in. So if you're familiar with this, some of the things we're looking at might be coping skills, self-awareness skills, motivation skills or motivation for school, maybe student agency, things like mindfulness, grit. We're not going to add all those here, but what we're trying to do is sort out those domains that exist from a strength-based perspective and think about what are those domains that really line up well to looking at truancy and absenteeism and link to student success that we might want to add into WARNS. And so over time, you'll see some of those items pop up if you're a user that the kids will look at and respond to. You won't get scores on those right away, but we'll be collecting data to see what seems to really be important to add to our domains. So we want to make people aware of that. Bruce, next slide, which will come to part of our discussions. So in that information that I've just given you in terms of our revision process, what we'd like to hear from you guys, either current users or people who know a bit about this, is what are your thoughts about the domains you see here that exist? And do you have thoughts about what information don't you get? If you were working with a child and the 6 domains you get and information you get, are there things you wish you had or things from an asset point of view that you think you would like to have? So I'll stop there and open it up for some comments.
Can you repeat that last bit? Your question, please.
Sure, Kurt. Thanks. So on the screen, you see these 6 domains that WARNS measures now. So one is, what thoughts do you have about those 6 in terms of what's working well? And then in terms of those 6, is something missing from what you wish you had scores on, or domains you wish were measured when you're having those conversations with kids and the parents? Does that help clarify that, Kurt? Yep, great.
I want to answer it, but I can't. I mean, there's a little overlap, you know, and then with the younger students that I do, like, you know, the middle school, it's always family.
Okay.
Seems to be a given just because of their age, family.
Like the family environment aspect of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know if the domains would be different for younger kids and older kids. That would be just something I'm wondering about. But just, I know that there's a research model and I am not a researcher, so I'm gonna mute myself.
Well, Kurt, I'll just say one thing that I see Aaron's hand coming up. I think you're actually onto something. When we've looked at some of the data in terms of what kind of information it gives us about certain levels of risk and needs. And we do see with the younger kids, like middle school, we do see some different spikes, if you will, or higher scores on some domains compared to others that you might expect where they are developmentally compared to the high school kids. So I think you're on track in terms of how you're thinking about that. It makes sense. So Aaron, go ahead.
Well, I think you're probably aware of this, but for our students, our EL students, sometimes it's hard to administer the WARNS for those students just because of the language barrier. So I was super excited when the Spanish versions were launched, and I'm hoping WSU will be able to expand that to more languages. I've actually seen students have to pull up like Google Translate to try to translate some of the words. Obviously, like I said, we have staff present, but I just don't know how that would, if that would skew the validity of the assessment results based on how Google Translate will define a word for the youth. So sometimes that's a little bit difficult. And then an area that I think would be nice to add, I was really excited that you talked about adding some strength-based items to the WARNS, is maybe some more questions about school climate. I know our district has been big into looking into school climate and how kids are feeling connected to school, and just finding out if they have at least one trusted adult on campus. Because that's something we always ask all of our students at our conferences, if they could identify at least one trusted adult on campus. And then we can provide that information back to that adult and let them know, look, this student identified you. And would you be willing to work with them, you know, in like a mentoring capacity if needed? And sometimes the staff members are really shocked. It could be the, you know, the custodian or, you know, the security officer that the student just engages with, you know, at lunchtime or whatever. So just a way to kind of identify, you know, who people are on campus that student is comfortable with. Because if we're going to roll them into a community engagement board meeting, I'd like to have that person there if possible, so that youth feels comfortable and feels supported.
Okay. No, those are great suggestions, and I like that a lot. And I'm guessing sometimes the trusted adult doesn't even know they might be identified as a trusted adult sometimes. So that would be good to capture. And the language issue, thank you for saying that about the Spanish version. One thing we struggle with a bit is trying to decide what language is next to go with, because it does take a lot of time, and then looking at data to make sure that translation and really adaptation of those content makes sense, given the different dialects that exist in some languages. So that's something we need to do, is just reach out to different districts and try to get an idea of what would be the next language or languages that we might try to look at and incorporate into WARNS. So thank you very much for that.
You have a hand up as well
Oh.
from Elizabeth.
Oh, okay.
I did not see that. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah,
go ahead. Oh, I see now. Okay, Elizabeth, yeah, go.
Hi, I administer the WARNS for a couple school districts on Lopez and Orcas, and almost all of the youth identify that they feel supported at the school, that they feel that school is a supportive environment, but they are also quite clearly disconnecting from school. So maybe one more companion question that helps bolster that youth that does feel supported, but is withdrawing for other reasons. So it doesn't, I'm not sure how to exactly say it, but it seems like it's showing that they're withdrawing from the school's activities. But what I hear when I'm doing a little bit of the motivational interviewing with them is that they do really appreciate the staff and everything that's happening at school, but they are personally drawing away.
Okay.
And somehow it's just coming up as school disengagement.
Okay. Yeah, so that's yeah, that's interesting. And I know in the literature in some areas, depending on the level of student you look at, those can be separate ideas. I think you're picking up on in terms of connection to people, you know, integrated to your peers or even adults. And there's this interconnection or connectedness to the institution itself, right? The school, the university, whatever it might be. And there's some different aspects in there. So that might require us to think through carefully, how do we get at that, both in terms of how they feel supported, maybe with the persons that are there, what the school's doing, but why that connection might not be there that caused them maybe to withdraw. Does that get at that a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I've just noticed it quite a few times, and it's just a little aspect of it that hopefully could be show that school engagement more when they're really feeling like they're being supported at school.
Yep.
And I think that might help. Maybe it's to bump up their maybe it depending on how they answer those set of questions, it would bump up the fact that they are struggling with depression or anxiety, and that's what's causing the school engagement than the school.
Yeah. Yeah, great. I also see in the chat some conversations about even earlier WARNS, like for elementary school kids. And that's actually on our list. So that's not part of this grant, but we have been talking about that as a group of, you know, one with the middle school having earlier than high school dealing with some issues so that they don't turn to bigger issues later on. So I think another is, how do you look at WARNS and what does that mean in terms of domains, which will be different, I think, at the younger ages, you know, K-5 and so forth. So that is on our radar. I saw Bruce smiling about that. That's conversations we've started. So that'll take us a little longer to get to, but it is there. And so we really appreciate hearing that. Oh, and I see engaged to school, but disengaged from peers. Okay, thanks, Kurt. That's great. Maybe that captures a bit too of what Elizabeth was talking about. So I don't want to use up all the time just on content, so we can pause for any last comments, but I want to make sure I transition to Chad and Mary for the next part on what I think is pretty important in terms of looking at how we communicate results of WARNS.
Okay, shall we continue?
Sure.
All right, so Chad and Mary, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. And you can go on ahead and move to the next slide.
Okay.
So hi, everybody. Chad Gotch here. It's my first Becca conference, so thank you for having me in your space here. And I'll be speaking on behalf of my partner in this part of the grant, Mary Roduta Roberts, as was introduced in the main session from University of Alberta. So we are officially an international conference today. So I'll take a couple slides here to talk about a portion of the grant that's on the reporting. So here we're talking about communicating back to students, counselors, or whatever individuals working with the students about the forms and levels of risk and need that are demonstrated in the students' responses. So this work, it may reflect some of the evolution of WARNS use, as Bruce and Brian alluded to, as it expands from its genesis in the court system. It also intersects with thoughts and work that Mary and I have had for the last few years about how reports with assessments of any kind of assessment can be used, and particularly around the idea of conversations and how reports from an assessment can be used to stimulate and facilitate conversations. And so we know from engaging with WARNS users in the past that the total risk score, the reports of risk level across the domains provide important information about the levels of risk that students, risk and need that students experience. But we also know that users have requested improvements for translating those WARNS outcomes into effective action. And so with that idea, the need that users have expressed and this idea of conversations, touching on some of the rapport building that was mentioned earlier, we are aiming to develop some narrative form of reporting along with the traditional report. And so that will occur through short vignettes that feature a central character whose behavior and experiences illustrate WARNS profile. So essentially illustrate their outcomes. So you get the total score, you get the identification of low, moderate, high in the domains, but then there's also this different form of representing what the student has shared with us. And we hope that by pairing the students' responses with a story that depicts their experiences in everyday life, that we will support more productive conversations with counselors. And this is coming from a research base in counseling. So research shows that people can have an easier time opening up about themselves if they can first talk about a character who may share some of their personal qualities. Go ahead and move to the next slide there, Bruce. So our steps in this part of the grant, first, we are aiming to convene a panel, an advisory panel, so that we can learn more about what these WARNS domains look like in students' lives, and develop some rich descriptions of those. And I imagine there'll be varied descriptions across districts in the state and even within districts probably. So we want to develop as good an understanding as we can of what these risks and needs look like for students. And then from that, we will develop these vignettes. And so that's the work that we'll be undertaking in this school year. And we aim for next school year to put these vignettes out into the field, either broadly or just with our panel, and start to see how they function. Are they useful? Do students respond to them? Are there revisions that we could make to possibly make the vignettes more effective? And so we're aiming to do that with the high school WARNS this year and next year. And then we'll repeat that process with the middle school WARNS in years 3 and 4, learning what we've learned from the first round, but then also exploring, as we've talked about already here, some of those unique ways in which the domains might manifest for students at that age. Go ahead, Bruce. So then our questions for you for today, if we think about using WARNS as a conversation starter, as a way to begin to explore what's happening with the student and to inform some of the intervention, the treatment plans as have been shared. What conversational supports might be useful to you? We're presenting vignettes, but you might have other ideas. I'm curious if you have worked previously with vignettes or other kinds of narratives, and if you have, what did you learn? And then the last one here, asking if you work with students with creative talents. I'm sure the answer is yes, but the reason I have that there is, as we develop the vignettes, we are really interested in involving the population that we serve with the WARNS and letting their stories be a part of the content, so that we can achieve as much authenticity as possible. And so we're interested in reaching out to students who might be able to, they might be good with creative writing. Part of our work is thinking about how we can involve those students in a respectful way so that they can contribute, and it contributes back to them, and we're not just exploiting them for their talents and what they provide. So yeah, any of those, the third question, you can just get in touch with me directly. And my email address will show up here in a few slides. But for those first two questions, I'm interested if anyone has anything to share along those lines.
Amber has a hand up.
Amber?
Hi, I had a question. Maybe this could be for everyone, but also my dog wants me to play with her. I'm sorry. Conversational supports. Well, I had. Does anyone use WARNS for the alternative learning experience students? So students that go to like our alternative high school or kind of like our half homeschool charter schools, because right now they have that law where if they haven't been able to contact the student within 2 weeks, they need to do WARNS. And just wondering, because that's new to me, about contacting students that we don't normally see all the time, if anybody had a suggestion.
Amber, are you wondering about how to make contact with the student? Is that where the problem?
Yeah, just if
Track them
anybody
down.
else at other school districts have had to contact families and students who are going to an alternative school. And I normally, for my district, I don't participate in that. And I'm unsure with how, I just didn't know if anybody else had that. I'm so sorry. I don't know if anybody else has been doing that. Has anybody else that's been using WARNS had to go to like a homeschool parent or a half homeschool parent and said, I haven't heard from your family in 2 weeks. We need to implement WARNS. We need to start a truancy process. I had one of my administrators for the all alternative high school and homeschool based program here asked me, so I'm asking. I'm not just randomly talking. I'm sorry.
I have done it. I did it last year. I know there are different rules last year, or maybe it was the year before. I'm in a small county, so I have to get very creative, but I just call them on the phone or meet them in a coffee shop. But anyway, I know there's lots of different rules about things, but some of these kids aren't always at school, so you have to be creative. So yeah, so I have done it with alternative school kids.
Thanks, Kurt. And I'll just mention, Amber, that we did develop last year that online protocol for the COVID environment. And you all can still use that protocol if you need to. If the only way to get in touch with a student is remotely, then that's certainly an option to try out.
And Elizabeth has her hand up as well.
Hi, yes, I've gone to the Parent Plus partner program and have gone many times driven out to people's houses and either taken my laptop or have done in a pinch the paper WARNS, and it's been helpful. That outreach has been great for those parents that are struggling.
If I may add to Amber, we definitely did it last year when we weren't seeing students in person. And like what Bruce had mentioned, we just did the online protocol. So what I would typically do is contact the family, kind of let them know what we were doing, kind of what the WARNS was. And then I would get the student on a Zoom call, and then I would share my screen so they could see kind of what I was reading. And then basically just make sure that they were in a safe place where they felt like they could answer the questions truthfully. So if that was all set up, they would see my shared screen, I would read the questions, and then they would tell me what their answer was, and we would just go through it like that. So I wasn't technically going to their house, but basically just kind of sharing my screen through Zoom and then doing it that way.
That's great. Thanks, Kella. Anyone else? Any comments about the vignettes? Any suggestions on the vignettes?
I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, but
No, Kurt, appreciate it.
I would start with the middle schoolers. I mean, I think that sometimes high schoolers are so sophisticated, they might think that's baby talk. But I think it would work better with the middle schoolers. But again, I'm not a researcher, I'm just an opinionated, undereducated folk. Joking, of course.
Thank you, Kurt. Yeah, I don't think we're not necessarily locked in at this point. We could consider doing middle school first, but I don't want to confuse vignette with being childish. The idea is it's a story, so it would be geared at the appropriate age group, and yeah, it's something that's used with adults as well. Don't let the French name fool you. Okay. Oh, that's there's an idea in the chat there, Kia. Kia, I might follow up with you. I'm gonna, again, in the interest of time, I'll let us move on so that Marcus can share some thoughts around accessibility, and I'll work in the chat here a little bit and maybe follow up with some of you afterwards.
Wait, I am looking at the time chat, and I mean, I feel like those questions, it'd be interesting to hear from, is it Kia, just kind of about what those vignette experiences have been like.
Hello. Yeah, so obviously they weren't geared towards attendance whatsoever. The premise of the leadership camp staff that I'm on is has 3 different components of our mission, and one of them is about character development. And so we used vignettes as opportunities to present a skit, like Chad was saying, to have our students think about a scenario and then reflect with other students. And then from there, it really depended on what the vignette was about. Sometimes it was about ethics or morals, or even just like presenting situations where students might have aha moments. And so different adults would come on stage, and they were generally pretty short. Sometimes we used technology kind of in the background, or other times it was just a quick brief skit that would help just kind of facilitate a point. We did one with like a pretty long mock trial when we were trying to teach what appropriate humor is. So there's lots of different ways that we went, totally not attendance, but it does bring to light an opportunity for students to be really reflective, and that's why we used it.
Awesome, that's great to hear. Thank you. Yeah. And I also see.
We were lucky. Also, our assistant director at camp was a drama teacher, so she kind of led the effort.
Right.
And had rock star kids that she would help like write some of the vignettes with.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we were. But I bet you could partner with some awesome like drama program or directors.
Right, right. And yeah, there are a lot of awesome kids out there that would provide some great content, I think. I also see in the chat, Christina Sotero, a question about cultural sensitivity, and absolutely that is that's high on the list. And so as we develop, as we form this advisory panel, we're really looking for representation across a lot of different contexts in the state, so that we can try to capture. The idea that would be that ideally we have multiple vignettes, so it's not just, if you have a student test high on depression, anxiety, there's not just one vignette that comes out of that, but maybe a few, and you can look at them, that the person working with the student can look at them and think about which one might resonate most with that student. We're also looking across dimensions of gender, so featuring male central characters, female, gender nonconforming in the vignettes, so that we could again capture different ways that these risks and needs might show up in students' everyday lives. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, Chad, if I can just add to that too.
Please.
So for all the WARNS development processes we do, what we're trying to do through the grant also is take different perspectives as we look at how items are functioning, how domains work, and so forth. So we've already started on some of that work, thinking about ecological models and sociocultural models, how our analyses fit into those different models, how they inform our models. So all of that will be intertwined into our whole processes.
Well, are we ready to continue? Chad, Marcus? Okay. Well, Marcus, I will go to the next slide here.
All right,
Take it away.
Chad, when you were saying first time at the Becca conference, I almost wanted to say, what's it, long time listener, first time caller. So they've been connected with WARNS for a few years now, but we're on a passive or periphery process, and that through this new grant get to be a little more active in the project. So my name is Dr. Marcus Poppen. I'm an assistant professor of special education here at Washington State University. And one of the things that Bruce had talked about is he was kind of reviewing the overview of that WARNS assessment, and then the platform is, WARNS a web-based assessment, and that, while online assessments offer some, neat opportunities with accessibility, they also present other opportunities or other barriers associated with accessibility. Bruce, could you go ahead and move to the next slide? So one of the big targets that we've got of the project, this project, is really to focus on removing some of those disability-related barriers for online assessments and try to integrate universally designed accommodations that are going to benefit all students within that web-based platform. And as we all know, that disability affects all of us, and that is the students that are within WARNS aren't impervious to that. And I believe that something like it's between 13 and 16% of the WARNS population are identified as being eligible to receive special education services, and that's fairly consistent with what we see across the state. And many of these students can have social or emotional disabilities that determine them eligible to receive special education services, but many of them as well also have other types of disabilities that may make it more difficult for them to be able to conduct or engage in an online assessment in the same way that other students may need to as well. So we're working under a set of 7 guiding principles around universal designed accommodations, and really trying to make sure that the students that we are working with to complete the WARNS are representative, and that representation includes youth and young adults with disabilities. We are aiming to focus on creating precise constructs, so being clear within our language and being focused on what it is that we're attempting to measure, and using items that function and that work across different skills and abilities that students may be bringing. So next slide, please. So, some of the things that we're really trying to focus on is creating more simplified test directions throughout the assessment, including assistive technology that allows for line readers and text-to-speech functionality, ways that we can use keyboards to be able to navigate the assessment, ways that, so somebody had mentioned kind of Google Translate, sometimes words on the assessment can be difficult. Are there ways that we can have a mouse over feature where somebody clicks on it and it provides a little bit more of an explanation or a detailed summary of, what that particular term may mean? And then ways that we, kind of the appearance of that particular assessment and the whole user experience to try and make the online assessment something that is more accessible for all individuals, particularly those with disabilities. So WARNS, as Bruce was talking about, has a variety of, it has kind of different interfaces. So we've got the interface of the assessment that students are going to be connected with. They're going to be taking that assessment. And then we've also got the back end, the platform, which is you all who are helping to manage and coordinate that assessment for those students. That what we will be doing is looking at that entire process and trying to think about the different ways that the different obstacles that could be presented from an accessibility standpoint along that process, and then identify some high leverage places where we can go in and make changes to that process to make it more accessible. Next slide, please. So one of the, so we're going to be conducting that audit assessment and then prioritizing. I think I've already discussed a big portion of this. Could we go to the next slide? So, have a couple of questions for you as WARN users. And, this is when you are out using the WARNs with your populations, with your students, are you experiencing any disability related barriers that your students bring while they're completing an online assessment like WARNs? Could we take a moment just to kind of open it up and see if that's an experience that folks are seeing?
Just defining words or making words simpler sometimes. That's one thing I've noticed.
How about others? Feel free to just chime in.
Kurt, I've experienced what you have with defining words.
I could just ask a follow-up question, Elizabeth and Kurt, is that with English language learners or English as first language or both, and high school, middle school, just to give them
it's been with both high school and middle school, English, their first language. They don't know what the words mean.
Same, exact same.
I would just add, specifically for that ELA learner where Spanish is the second language and English is the tertiary language, whereas they have their primary is indigenous. It's a Latino indigenous language. So, and that is challenging because sometimes there just isn't always a translation for some of that indigenous language, even in Spanish. So.
No, that's a great comment, Christina. Thank you. And yeah, so I think some of the issues come in. I just look at our words we have now or phrases. Some of those would be idioms, and some of those just don't. You have to adapt them. You cannot translate them. So even going to a Google Translate, that probably wouldn't work or make sense necessarily, or have a different meaning than what we're trying to get at. So those are great feedback points for us to really think about the words and then what, how those translate to different languages and the meaning behind those words. Can we make it simpler and less jargon laden or idioms? Thank you.
I just have one more thing. It's Elizabeth because I've worked in 3 school districts, and especially this last year, I kind of wonder what it's like for a group of people to do the WARNs together, because I have had students who are struggling who have cried during the time that they're filling out the warrants. And because I'm pairing it with having spoken to their parents and also domains of motivational interviewing, I feel prepared to support them and have a trauma-informed lens. And doing that on their own in a classroom, it just seems like maybe it's just different from the security possibly that they're feeling when they're doing it alone with me. They're talking quite a bit about their feelings. So I don't know if that's a special accommodation, but I just felt like it was important to say.
Yeah, I've taken that note down and kind of added that to the WARNS team in that initial conversation that we've been having about WARNS use and sort of the things that we may need to consider. That's a really good point, Elizabeth. I'd be curious if any of you are, using or have used WARNS with individuals with, different disabilities than specific learning disabilities or high incidence disabilities. Are there any students with low incidence disabilities that you have used the WARNS with, and have they experienced any distinct barriers related to completing the assessment? Definitions would definitely come into play for folks that maybe have cognitive disabilities or intellectual impairments. Are there other types of lower incidence disabilities that you have attempted to use the WARNS with but have run into barriers? Okay, I'd be curious if some of that has to do, I see a hand up. Amber, why don't you go ahead?
I was going to say a lot of the students that I work with that might have some of those barriers, they have a case manager. And for any of the attendance conferences or any attendance related activities, I usually invite like the IEP case manager, or I ask to join an IEP meeting that might be happening. So a lot of those students are kind of get some extra protection. So I normally would not go down the path of having a WARNS for a student like that. So I just don't have the experience. I did one time do one for a student, and it was like one of the very first times I did. And I was thinking, this doesn't feel right. And I didn't know the student very well. I just wasn't really well versed in my role yet. And then the parent was really mad that I did a WARNS. So if we have that, if the lack of experience for me is just that, we just don't really do that. We try to partner with their case managers and staff, wraparound staff.
Yeah, that was actually kind of what I was thinking about is, wondering if students with more significant disabilities aren't necessarily considered as being appropriate for WARNS, and if that in and of itself could potentially be a barrier for those students to be engaging in the assessment and being able to get that that information to help make some informed decisions to support those students. Does anybody else have any other thoughts around accessibility features that you would like to see, or even just the concept of individuals with disabilities using the WARNS? Deaf, hard of hearing, visual impairments, students with intellectual disabilities, students with multiple disabilities.
I have not encountered that, so sorry.
No, that's great. That's why we're having this conversation. Helpful to hear.
I had a student he was just a low reader, and I read him the WARNS questions, and I think he felt very uncomfortable answering those questions as I was asking him, as I was putting the answers in. I think that text to talk would be amazing, just because putting them on the spot, some of those questions are super personal. I just think that he felt very uncomfortable.
Thank you. Yeah, to be able to put headphones on and listen to that and to be able to respond to that in your own time rather than feeling like you need to respond individually to each question, going line by line with somebody. Okay, well, that I think covers part of that discussion, and know that we're going to continue and try to work to improve those features and think about ways that maybe we can, specifically understand the functioning of those, of WARNS across those various populations, and hopefully introduce some more data that can help address issues of truancy and dropout, because those populations are not isolated from those risk factors as well. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks, Marcus. And I'm going to proceed to our summary slide here. We just have one more slide after this for about our user advisory panel. So I'm just going to invite our panel speakers here to just whatever you want to reemphasize or summarize here on this summary screen. Go ahead and speak up.
I don't know if I have anything to emphasize on the slide, but I do want to just extend a very sincere thank you to everyone for their input today. It's super helpful to hear your comments and how WARNS is being used in practice and the things you're dealing with. So for us, I think I can speak for my team. They can tell me otherwise, but I think it's good for us to have this reflection as we move our work forward. So I really appreciate the comments and the insights. So thank you for that.
Yes, thanks, Brian, and your comments and suggestions are welcome throughout the year, throughout the life of the grant. If you think of something, just please go ahead and contact us. Send us an email. We'd be happy to examine any feedback at any time, anytime it occurs to you. So the last slide that we have is an invitation to join our user advisory panel as part of the grant. It's an official part of the grant to continue to share your experiences with us and the experiences your students face. And Chad, do you have anything to add for this?
Just again, to reiterate that we hope to have diverse representation on this panel. And so we welcome lots of interest. If we get more interest than we can handle, because we also want to keep it kind of small and intimate. We'll think about ways that we can still have people participate. There might be a panel that is involved early on in the development of vignettes, but then we might have a broader group that provides us maybe more intensive feedback than the broader base of WARNS users. But I don't know, Mary, is there anything else that we want to say about this other than we hope to work with some of you? So please get in touch with me, and we'll be looking to form this panel here right away in the next couple of weeks so that we can start organizing a time to get together, which might be the hardest part of the grant. So that's all. Just thank you again for your thoughts and being here with us today.
Okay, thanks, Chad. And this is our final thank you screen. Thank you all for joining us and contributing to this effort. We really appreciate it. This is our contact information. If you have anything more to contribute or reach out to us, contact us here. We also have our WARNS email address, which will come to us as well. So warns@wsu.edu is the WARNS email address. So thank you very much. And Christina, I see your hand is up. Is that for something else?
No, I just had a couple quick questions, just
Sure.
Since all of you are right here and we still have, most of us are still on the line. So the panel, I guess my question is, I feel like a lot of the schools in my district, so I'm the Becca case manager for Skagit County Office of Juvenile Court. I feel like a lot of my schools are not using the WARNS and opting for another assessment. And so my question to all of you, and maybe this is going to be more towards with Chad, can we pilot one of my schools, or what would be the best way? I don't want to try and sell WARNS, but I want to make sure that they understand. I feel really deeply about the data reporting piece. I think that's really significant. And I'm not so sure that the other assessments are able to collect that data. And so I'm just wondering, you know, like, is there a pilot that they can participate in? Would you prefer for those schools to contact you, you know, separately and ask, you know, some questions and kind of get their frustrations off their chest? I don't see them here on the call right now, so.
I think that's a wonderful idea worth exploring. I think what might be good is if you don't mind reaching out to us with an email. Sure. I think there's a piece that's about the advisory panel, but then I'd probably rope in Bruce and Brian, who are a little more familiar with operations. And we can think about, you know, is there a way that we can do what you're talking about? Because that would be, I like what you're saying.
Okay. Sure, I will reach out via email and include all of you.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Christina, for thinking of that. Appreciate that.
Yeah, certainly. We're happy to help. I do see Kurt's message about, is it legally mandated? You know, the WARNS isn't, like, I think in the state, you can choose what assessment to use. WARNS is one of those options. What I would say, though, if you look at our website, this is the researcher part of me speaking. If you look at our website, I think what you would find in both our kind of technical manuals and then our research that we have around WARNS, if you were to start to compare that to other assessments that look similar, you'll find, I think WARNS has some of the best evidence so far supporting kind of the technical properties of it. And that's important to me when we're using scores with students or with anyone to make decisions, even with other information we're using. So I'm just, I'm throwing out there, you can choose whatever you want to use, but I also think about, what evidence do we have to support the use of whatever instrument we're choosing. And I think WARNS has I could be biased, but I think we've done a good job trying to document that over the last several years.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Brian. And the legislation names WARNS, but it doesn't specify WARNS. It specifies an evidence-based assessment. And so something that's just homegrown, which I've heard some districts using, is not going to be evidence-based probably. So that's the problem that I see. Who knows what is actually really being measured and how well is it being measured?
Just in case folks didn't see in the chat, I'm happy to hang out for a little while longer if people want to stay connecting. Maybe you have conversations going on in the chat with people you don't get to see very often. I am not in this announcement trying to, how do you say, volunteer the WARNS team to stay on any longer than what time they have allocated, but I can at least hold this space for folks. Or if you're all done, let me know. But I'd love for people to feel complete before they depart.
Yeah, we can hang out for a bit. That's totally fine.
Sure. So one thing I'll just add, as far as other districts who aren't using WARNS and the reasons why they might not be, cost still appears to be one reason, but there also seem to be just some general misconceptions out there that are rooted in how the assessment was originally developed. For example, the assessment used to require written parent permission. And that's no longer the case. And so I think there's some people who are just operating under some misconceptions that no longer exist. And so any suggestions that anyone might have to try to overcome that, we'd appreciate. But I think that's where some resistance to WARNS may be coming from.
Bruce, I just have a question for you guys. I use the WARNS for my at-risk youth caseload. I'm a juvenile probation counselor, so it's a little different than some of the other roles here. We're still completely virtual in our at-risk youth hearings, and our schools are okay with us coming by. They don't really want us there very much. So the way we used to administer this, because we don't have a space, an office, anything where a kid can actually sit at a computer, do the WARNS, do that. So what we would do in the past is I would just print the packet off. I would write a number in there that we were going to put them in, have them fill that out. So I have tried numerous ways. I have emailed it to the parents, asked them to just have the kid, print it off, do it, scan it, return it. They're not figuring that out. I even tried to convert it over to a Word document where they could just put an X in the box and email it back. Still have not had a whole lot of luck getting those back. So I don't know if there is now or if there's ever in the future going to be, hey, here's a secure link for you to just go in and fill it out and it just goes. I don't know. Any suggestions from anybody would be great. I'm just not having very good luck getting those returned to me.
Well, thanks, Matt. Thanks for bringing that up. So one suggestion: have you tried our remote assessment protocol?
I haven't yet. I was just briefly looking at that. Is that through Zoom? Is that what that would be? You just
yes.
Okay.
And so one of the things that you can do with it is not just have a meeting with the student, but you can actually give them control of your computer. You can give them mouse control. So you can kind of step back, but still be there while they are using their mouse on their computer to actually click on the items and respond and click the next question and this sort of thing. And that was, of course, developed for the COVID environment, but I think that people can still make use of it in situations like yours, and you're still there. One of the important things is it's good to have an adult, a counselor there, depending on to handle whatever reaction the student might have, and that allows for that. It's remote, but you're still there to talk to. So if you have any questions about that, there is a training video on our website for using the protocol, and we'd certainly be happy to answer any questions that you have about using
I'll check that out. That sounds probably like the way we're going to have to go. So
great. Thanks, Matt.
Perfect. Thank you.
Brian, you're muted.
I see that. Thank you. I know as I started talking. To follow up on that too, one question came up in the chat. Christina Mintis asked about who could administer it, and you started to address that. WARNS is not like other more protected psychological tests necessarily, where it doesn't have any type of certification required to administer the WARNS. But as Bruce was saying, it's good to have a counselor or another adult there in case there are any kind of reactions to the questions, as we heard today in the conversations. And so generally what we suggest is you have someone who's familiar with the child or has general training in working with kids be there so they know how to handle those events. But there's no special requirements in terms of certification for this, unlike it would if it was an intelligence test or something like that. The other comment too is about too much time. And so we're actually trying to address that a little bit. On average, WARNS takes about 13 minutes, ranging up to half an hour. So it's not too time intensive, although we're sensitive to comments we've had about that. So we've gotten some preliminary work done so far in developing essentially a short form, which is still a computer-based, but a computer adaptive test. And we're able to, we think, do an assessment in maybe 8 minutes or 6 minutes with less items. So that's still in the trial phase, and we're working on this, on the research behind that. But we're hoping within a year or a bit more to have another version of WARNS out that actually would shrink that time down, but still give you good estimates if a child needed to take the whole WARNS or they were low enough risk that they could stop after a short amount of time and be done with that. So I'm just mentioning that is in the works, and we're trying to work on those issues that could be barriers for use. And I see.
Go ahead. I apologize.
No, go ahead.
So I do have another question, and I'm not trying to sidetrack or deflect from what you were just saying, but earlier, Matt, Harrison, and Kurt mentioned that they did warrants for AR. I thought that they said for ARY, and I just wanted a little bit of clarification. If in fact it was for an ARY caseload, and how they did that. And then what did they do with the results?
Yeah, for me, it is for my ARY caseload. And with the results, we just try to, work with what's on there also just to identify any needs that may not have popped up during our disposition meeting with the parents or whatever. We can use that to try to see any needs they may have that are just not obvious through school, through drug use, through peers, through whatever. So we just use that as we work along with the parents in the court to try to figure out what their needs are.
Okay, so you're kind of using it like the risk assessment then?
Yeah, almost like we would with our PACT. I mean, it's kind of the same thing we would do with like a probation caseload. This is not quite as in-depth as that is, but yeah, I mean, it would just be those areas that we want to focus on, and sometimes kind of help guide the parents toward, let's not, and I'm going to use quotes on this, let's not focus on the petty stuff, but let's try to dig down and see what really is going on here and address those things that we may not be seeing. And, we're again, even though it's not probation, we're looking for behavior change here. And in order to find that, we want to look at those areas. So.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
I just was going to respond. I have used it just very little, mainly for truancy. But I think I hear Matt saying that it does help you focus on the targets, because the parents want to talk about they need to clean their room and all that jazz.
Yeah, very frequently. You're absolutely right.
I just have a question, because I don't know if the WARNS was designed for, this is a great, I forgot who brought it up, but is it designed for Becca stuff, or is it just truancy? I mean, the questions seem to be for truancy.
It was designed to address truancy and chronic absenteeism. But it can be used for broader applications. It's not restricted to that.
So then would that mess up the data collection piece of it though? If it's not, if the WARNS was created for truancy, and if we being some of us from OJC, start to use it for ARY and CHINs, is that going to throw off the data piece?
Are you asking from our perspective as the holders of the data, or for your own?
Yeah, is there a spot to identify if it's truancy, ARY, or CHINs?
You could do that in the comment box at the very end.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't think that is not going to impact our data. That's not something that you as a user should worry about, whether you identify it or not. We know how to mess with data. We know how to handle the data, and we've got lots of experience with very messy data. So please use it as you feel you need to. Is there anything else? Ellis, do we go back to the main session after this?
No, we're done. We're ending this session or these days with the breakout rooms, just in the breakout room. So people get to have their days and their lives back. I can tell you nice things if you feel like you're missing some, but this was a great presentation, very informative. I unfortunately can only pay like a quarter of attention because most of my brain is worried that some disaster is happening that's right in front of me that I just can't see. Like I'm working on 2 or 3 different devices, but like I told my girlfriend at the beginning, I was like, the WARNS team is solid and they've done the Becca conference a few times. So I'm mostly just in theory relaxing here and trying to stay on top of things. So I appreciate having y'all.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to seeing you all in person next year.
Yeah, that's what we said last year, but I think this time it'll actually be true.
All right. Well, thanks.